Hi, everyone. It's meteorologist Brian Bennett. We're looking at Hurricane Michael. Michael could end up being one of the most powerful hurricanes to ever move into the Florida Panhandle. For Panama City Beach, it's definitely going to be worse than what they experienced with Hurricane Opal. Opal made landfall right around the Pensacola area. This storm is going to make landfall most likely right around Panama City Beach. A couple things to look at here. First of all, as of 9:30 p.m., the storm is pretty much due west of the Sarasota area. Still a very symmetric, healthy looking storm with a very defined center of circulation, perhaps encountering a little bit of western wind shear. It's also wobbling back and forth a little bit, which is perfectly normal for any large hurricane. So that's going to control exactly where it makes landfall, where that wobble ends up being once it makes landfall. Additionally, we're looking at the storm now moving to the north. It is not going to turn back to the northwest. The next turn we see is going to be to the northeast, and that northeasterly turn, and when it happens, will obviously control where the hurricane makes landfall as well. Taking a look at the 1 minute satellite imagery from the GOES 16 satellite, and again, you can see that very defined center of circulation. At the moment, we have the most convection on the northern side of the storm, but that's going to end up getting pulled around the storm and end up having a pretty concentric, powerful eye wall around this hurricane. Here's a track from the National Hurricane Center, and not a whole lot has changed. Still, it's going to move into the western Florida Panhandle and then remain a tropical storm as it goes through Georgia and the Carolinas, never being downgraded to a tropical depression because of its forward speed. As again, 9:30 p.m., sustained winds 120 miles per hour, so it is a strong Category 3 hurricane. Again, it has made the northerly turn right around 12 miles per hour and forward speed. A Cat 3 hurricane, it could become a Cat 4 hurricane. Again, we only need winds to increase by about 11 miles per hour for it to be classified as a Cat 4 hurricane. It has a big swath of tropical storm force winds, as you can see painted in the green color here, winds between 39 and 73 miles per hour sustained. So when this storm moves up into the Panhandle, pretty much this entire area from almost Mobile to almost the Gainesville area is going to be experiencing tropical storm force sustained winds. And the orange color here, this represents hurricane force winds, which is about 60 to 80 miles wide. All right, let's take a look at this graphic that I created here, and this will help us kind of pinpoint exactly where the hurricane is most likely to make landfall. And I put 13 different computer models on here, and if I factor in which model I think is most accurate and handles storms right before they make landfall the best, then my best prediction at this point will be that the hurricane is going to make landfall right around Tyndall Air Force Base, which is in this general vicinity just east of Panama City Beach. And I think it's going to be right around Wednesday at 2 p.m. Winds will be sustained around 115 miles per hour. Here on the right, you can see what the different models are forecasting as far as landfall times and the speeds. Landfall times vary from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., so really not a lot of variance of when the center of circulation is going to move on shore. As far as the wind speeds go, the models range from 95 all the way to 125, being forecasted by the National Hurricane Center. All right, speaking of landfall, it's going to be in the western Florida Panhandle. We can narrow it down at this point to a 60-mile stretch between Rosemary Beach and St. Vincent Island, most likely going to be right around the Tyndall Air Force Base area. The main threats: storm surge upwards of 9 feet, especially in the Big Bend area. Nearly a foot of rainfall is going to fall in the western Florida Panhandle. Winds will be sustained of at least 115 miles per hour, possibly gusting to 140 miles per hour. Some key messages. This is a fast-moving storm, so the wind damage is going to be pretty extensive, even up into southeast Alabama and into Georgia and the Carolinas as well, as the storm's not really going to have time to weaken too much as it tracks up into Georgia. Storm surge, it's the most deadly part of a hurricane, so if you're watching this and you're in a location that is prone to storm surge, it's not too late to evacuate, but you want to do so quickly. Again, you run from the water and you hide from the wind. Power. It's going to go out throughout much of the Florida Panhandle and even into Georgia and the Carolinas potentially as well, with trees coming down and power lines obviously being knocked down as well. And the Panama City area, expect hurricane force winds from roughly 2 p.m. Wednesday to about 2 a.m. Thursday or Wednesday night, Thursday morning. That's a period of about 10 to 12 hours of hurricane force winds in the Panama City area. Again, we mentioned this 115 mile per hour winds. This storm is going to be worse for Panama City than Hurricane Opal was. Opal made landfall about a good hour's drive or farther west in Pensacola area. So it's going to be much worse for the Panama City area. Low tide is going to be at 7 a.m. On Wednesday morning. High tide will be at 10:30 p.m. So the water will be a foot higher naturally at 10 p.m. than it will be at 7 o'clock in the morning. In the Tampa Bay area, not really too much of an impact from this hurricane. We're going to have winds perhaps of maybe 40 miles per hour at area beaches, so not really too much to talk about wind-wise, though with that hurricane offshore, it is going to whip up some big waves, so rip currents, big waves, some beach erosion, definitely likely with this storm, and the strongest winds would be occurring Wednesday afternoon in the Tampa Bay area. Storm surge, a maximum of 1 foot in the Bay Area. Head north to Crystal River, storm surge would be on the order of about 1 to 3 feet. High tide in the Tampa Bay area, Wednesday at 1:25 p.m., and that's 2.84 feet. And if you experienced any flooding today, you're probably going to experience some flooding on your Wednesday afternoon during this high tide as well. And then Wednesday night, Thursday morning at right around midnight, we'll have a high tide of 3 feet. And that's actually one of the highest tides that will be experienced actually throughout the month of October. So kind of bad timing here for the astronomical tides to coincide with the hurricane. Some of the models are actually predicting this could become a Cat 4 hurricane. Otherwise, we're looking at a very solid major hurricane with Cat 3 status. Here's a look at the high resolution rapid refresh model, and you can see the hurricane heading north here on the future radar. And notice that for the most part, the peninsula of Florida really doesn't see a whole lot of rain, other than perhaps maybe an outer rain band that could spread east off of the hurricane. And that could contain some brief heavy rain and some gusty winds as well. But for the most part, the heavy rain and the wind is going to be confined primarily to the Panhandle and up into Georgia and the Carolinas. Here's a look at the wind speed forecast, and this is from the European computer model. So let's take you through this. First of all, the strong winds move on shore by Wednesday morning. The strongest winds happen in the Panama City area. Looks like right around 2 to 4 p.m. roughly in Panama City. And then we see those strong winds pass through Georgia, possibly gusting to hurricane force in southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama. South Carolina, we're looking at wind gusts on the order of about 60 miles per hour, and even North Carolina could see winds gusting 40 to 50 miles per hour. Coastal areas could see hurricane force wind gust in Cape Hatteras and all the way down to Wilmington. And again, this storm will never be downgraded to a tropical depression, remaining a tropical storm even as it heads through the Carolinas. All right, here's a look at the GFS model, taking the storm to the north. You can see the wind direction. Initially, for Panama City, the winds will be out of the east. And then once the eye passes, the winds will actually turn westerly. So you'll get beat up from the east first, and then those winds will turn and become out of the west. Here's a look at the projected rainfall totals. And you can see anywhere right along the path of the hurricane, we could see anywhere from 10 inches of rain to maybe a foot, maybe 13, 14 inches of rain in this general vicinity. Not nearly as much rain projected for the Florida Peninsula, but heavy rain all the way up through central Georgia and the Carolinas. Taking a look at a special parameter here, this is the possibility of a tornado due to wind shear. Yeah, tornadoes are actually present in hurricanes. Hurricanes can produce some pretty fast-acting tornadoes, and you see the red color there, that represents the possibility of a few tornadoes possibly around Apalachicola up through the Big Bend. That includes Tallahassee, Florida, and even up into southern Georgia. We could see the possibility of a tornado. Even northern Florida, a quick, fast-acting tornado not completely out of the realm of possibility, especially on the right quadrant of this hurricane. Storm surge, as I mentioned, is the most deadly aspect of any tropical system. You don't want to be on the right side of a hurricane. When you're on the right side, the right quadrant, that's where the winds are blowing onshore, and that's where you see the greatest storm surge. And the red color here, right around Apalachicola, spreading through the Big Bend, we're seeing about a 9-foot inundation of water. So big time storm surge up through the Big Bend, Apalachicola. Head left of the center of circulation, and the storm surge won't be nearly as bad. So your hope is to be left of the center of circulation or the eye. All right, wanted to quickly mention red tide. I think that this hurricane is actually going to eradicate the red tide that's been happening in the Florida Panhandle. The wind and the waves is going to really stir things up. So the red tide should be history for the Florida Panhandle after this event. For southeast Florida, I don't think much is going to change. We're going to continue with an easterly wind, so that's going to drag the Carina brevis onshore, and it could even worsen a little bit for parts of Martin, Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade County. So not too much changing due to the hurricane with the red tide situation there. There is a little bit of a question mark for the red tide event here in southwest Florida that's been going on for 11 months down in the Lee and Charlotte County area. And what I want to show you here is actually the most recent satellite image we have. And notice offshore of Sanibel Island, this dark murky colored water here is some pretty high concentrations of Carina brevis. Well, if you get a southwest wind, then you're looking at that Carina brevis and the associated nutrients being dragged north. That's what happened with Tropical Storm Gordon earlier this year. In fact, if it wasn't for Gordon earlier in the summertime, then we probably wouldn't even have red tide in Pinellas County. So not likely that we're going to see an optimistic outcome to the red tide here in southwest Florida. Let's take a look at the Gulf currents and the directions we'll have over the next couple of days. And these are the surface currents, and this will control where the surface red tide blooms are directed. So as we move into Wednesday, we're going to have winds and currents that are blowing onshore. So that's going to make the brevitoxins blowing onshore and make breathing a little difficult. Well, actually, maybe pretty difficult, actually, for much of the west coast of Florida where red tide is impacting. Also, with a southwest to northwest movement, that's probably going to drag the red tide to the north as well. As we move through Wednesday night, we're looking at an onshore current, again bringing the red tide closer to shore. And then as we move towards Thursday afternoon, still a west to east current dragging the crap that's offshore towards onshore. So not great news there. And then as we move into Friday, we're still looking at an onshore wind. That onshore wind actually continues all the way through Friday night before winds turn and shift out of the north. And that'll be something we'll look forward to, as a change from that westerly wind and the westerly Gulf currents. So the big question mark here is how concentrated is this water offshore of Sanibel? If it's incredibly highly concentrated, then that's going to be enough Carina brevis and nutrients where it's going to be allowed to be drugged north, and it could result in a whole nother round of fish kill and bad red tide conditions for Manatee, Sarasota counties, and even up into Pinellas County as well. If it's not highly concentrated, then the waves and the wind could disperse it enough where maybe conditions actually wouldn't worsen too bad for beaches to the north. Unfortunately, I don't have any water samples that have been taken in this area. Most of the water samples have been taken from the immediate shoreline, so it's a bit of a question mark, but that's something that will be answered pretty quickly. As soon as the clouds move out, I'm going to show you another satellite image, and we'll be able to determine how bad the red tide transition due to the hurricane, and obviously I'll have reports from area beaches as well. All right, so those are the Gulf currents, and I just showed you that. One last little thing to mention here is if you're watching this and you're in the Panama City Beach area, it is not too late to evacuate. I actually just spoke with my uncle and aunt. They were thinking about toughing out the storm in Panama City, and I really urge them to not do so. winds gusting to 140 miles per hour. Not a good thing. So they're actually looking at making a northwesterly drive. It's kind of last minute, but it's not too late. Conditions have not deteriorated, so you can still head to the northwest, anywhere right along I-65, and you'll be fine from the very strongest winds, and you'll also be fine from the storm surge as well. All right, guys, I know that ended up being kind of lengthy, but that's the latest on the hurricane. I appreciate you watching. Everybody, please stay safe, and I'll have any updates as they are warranted.